Hell's Angels offered $4.6 million to anyone who could fix it. Then a teen changed everything in 60 seconds. The garage was quiet, the kind of quiet that only came after midnight, when the whole world outside seemed to be sleeping, and only the ghosts stayed awake. Jack Mercer stood in the middle of the concrete floor, arms crossed over his chest, looking at the shape under the black cloth like he had 100 times before. He did not need to pull the cloth back to see it. He had it memorized. Every curve of the tank, every line of the frame. 12 years of standing in this same spot had burned the picture into his mind so deep that he could have drawn it with his eyes closed. But tonight, he pulled the cloth back anyway. The chrome caught the dim light from the single bulb hanging above, throwing soft gold across the handlebars. The motorcycle sat there, silent, patient, like it was waiting for something Jack could not give it. The leather seat was cracked with age. The engine was cold. It had been cold for 12 years now, ever since the day Thomas Reed passed, and no one, not one person in this club or outside of it, had been able to bring it back to life. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Jack ran a hand along the tank, feeling the dust under his fingers. He remembered the day Thomas rolled this bike out of the garage for the first time, engine roaring so loud the neighbors came out to watch. Thomas had been smiling that day, the kind of smile that came from a man who had built something with his own 2 hands and knew, deep down, that it meant more than metal and bolts. "This bike right here," Thomas had said, standing in front of the whole club. "This is us. Every piece of it came from somewhere different. Different hands, different stories. But put it all together and look what you get." Jack had been young then, barely past 20, and he had believed every word. Now he was 45 years old, and the bike had not made a sound in over a decade. Every year that passed, the silence got heavier. Mechanics came from all over, some with fancy tools and fancier names, and every single one of them walked away shaking their heads. Some said the engine was too far gone. Some said parts like this were not even made anymore. One man, a specialist from 3 states over, had spent 6 months on it before finally admitting defeat, saying the bike was cursed. Jack did not believe in curses, but he believed in failure, and he had watched enough of it to know how heavy it sat on a man's chest. He thought about the club now, about the members who had joined in the years since Thomas passed. Some of them had never even heard his voice, never seen him ride, only knew him through stories and photographs pinned to the garage wall. To them, this motorcycle was just an old relic, something dusty and broken that the older members refused to let go of. But to Jack, it was something else. It was a promise that got harder to keep with every passing year. He looked at the cracked leather seat and felt something twist in his chest, something between grief and anger, and a stubborn kind of hope that refused to die no matter how many mechanics walked away shaking their heads. "I'm not giving up on you," Jack said quietly, to the empty garage, to the silent machine, to the memory of a man who had believed in second chances more than anyone Jack had ever known. "Somebody out there is going to bring you back. I don't care what it takes." He stood there a long moment longer, then reached out and covered the bike again. Careful, the way you would tuck a blanket around someone sleeping. He turned off the light and walked out into the cold night air, already turning over an idea in his mind. An idea that had been building inside him for weeks now, waiting for the courage to say it out loud. By morning, the garage was full. Every member of the club stood shoulder to shoulder around the motorcycle, murmurs rising and falling as they waited for Jack to speak. He pulled the cloth away one more time, letting the morning light hit the chrome. $4,600,000, Jack announced, his voice steady and loud enough to fill the whole room. That's the reward for whoever can bring this bike back to life. Because this isn't about money. This is about finishing what Thomas Reed started. By the third day, the quiet street outside the garage did not exist anymore. News vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes pointed up at the sky like metal flowers. Reporters stood in front of cameras, talking fast, holding microphones with foam covers that had the names of television stations printed on the sides. A crowd had gathered behind a rope line that Jake Thompson had set up that morning, using orange cones borrowed from the hardware store down the road. Jack stood near the garage door, arms crossed, watching it all unfold like a man watching weather roll in. He had expected some attention. He had not expected this. "Mr. Mercer," a reporter called out, pushing toward the front of the crowd. "Is it true you're offering $4.6 million for a single motorcycle repair?" Jack stepped forward, his boots heavy on the pavement. The morning sun caught the gray in his beard, making him look older than his 45 years. Or maybe just tired. "It's true," he said, "but this isn't about the money." "Then what is it about?" another reporter shouted. Jack looked past the cameras, past the crowd, back toward the garage where the motorcycle sat under its black cloth, hidden from the world, but not from his mind. "Our founder built that bike with his own hands," Jack said. "His name was Thomas Reed. He believed people deserved second chances. He believed that when you put broken pieces together with the right kind of care, you could build something that mattered. That motorcycle was his way of showing us what that looked like." A woman near the front, holding a magazine with a picture of a wrench on the cover, raised her hand. "Some folks are saying this whole thing is a publicity stunt, that the Hells Angels are just trying to clean up their image." Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "I don't care what folks say. I care about finishing what Thomas started. That bike has been silent for 12 years. Somebody out there can fix it. When they do, they'll understand why it matters more than the money ever could." He turned and walked back inside before anyone could ask another question, leaving the reporters to argue among themselves about what he meant. By the time famous mechanics started arriving that afternoon, men with television shows and sponsorship deals and toolboxes that cost more than most cars, Jack had already retreated to the back office, watching through a cracked door as each one took their turn failing in front of the cameras. The last one packed up his tools around 6 in the evening, shaking his head, muttering something about a curse before climbing into his truck and driving away. The garage slowly emptied. The reporters left to file their stories. The crowd thinned until only the club remained. That was when Marcus Vance found Jack sitting alone on an overturned crate near the workbench, staring at the covered motorcycle like it might disappear if he looked away. "You all right?" Marcus asked, lowering himself onto a crate across from him. His knees cracked from years of hard riding. Jack did not answer right away. He rubbed his hands together, feeling the calluses that 30 years of wrenches and road had given him. "You ever think," Jack said slowly, "that maybe we failed him?" Marcus frowned. "Failed who?" "Thomas." "That bike sat there for 12 years, Marcus. 12 years, and not one of us could bring it back. Every year it just sits there broken. It feels like we're losing him a little more. Like we couldn't protect what he built." Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Thomas didn't build that bike so we'd sit around worshiping it, Jack. He built it so we'd remember what it stood for." "I know that," Jack said, his voice rough. "But look at us. Famous mechanics, fancy tools, all that money on the table, and nobody can fix it. Makes you wonder if his dream is just too big for us now." Marcus reached over and put a hand on Jack's shoulder. "We're not giving up. You said that yourself, and you meant it." Jack nodded slowly, looking back towards the covered shape in the dim light. "We're not giving up," he said again, quieter this time, like he was making the promise to himself as much as to Marcus. Somebody's gonna walk through that door and prove Thomas was right about second chances. I just don't know when. The days that followed felt like a strange kind of parade. One expert after another walking through the garage doors with big reputations and bigger toolboxes, each one certain they would be the one to solve the puzzle that had beaten everyone else. On Monday, a man named Victor Alvarez showed up. He had his own television show about restoring classic cars, and he brought a film crew with him, setting up lights around the motorcycle like it was a movie set. Victor talked the whole time he worked, explaining to the camera what he was doing, using words like compression ratio and carburetor timing that most people in the room did not understand. He worked for 6 hours straight, sweat soaking through his shirt, before he finally stepped back and threw his wrench down on the workbench. "This engine is from a different era," Victor said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Parts like this you can't just order online. Half of what's in there was custom made by hand, probably one piece at a time. Whoever built this wasn't just a mechanic. He was some kind of genius, and geniuses don't leave instructions." Jack watched from the doorway, saying nothing, his arms crossed over his chest. On Wednesday, a woman named Dr. Patricia Sims arrived. She had a doctorate in mechanical engineering and had spent years working for a company that built race car engines. She did not talk much, preferring to work in silence, taking notes in a small leather notebook as she examined every inch of the motorcycle. She stayed until midnight, using tools that looked like they belonged in a hospital instead of a garage. When she finally packed up, she found Jack still there, sitting in the same spot he always sat. "I've seen a lot of engines in my life," she said, her voice tired. "This one does not want to be fixed. There's something wrong deep inside it, something I can't find, and I've looked everywhere. Whoever built this bike hid its secrets well." Jack thanked her for trying. She left without another word, and the garage felt a little colder after she was gone. By Friday, the club had lost count of how many people had come and gone. A retired NASCAR mechanic, a young engineer who had built engines for the military, a collector who claimed to own 3 motorcycles from the same era as Thomas Reed's bike. Every single one of them left with the same explanation, dressed up in different words but meaning the same thing. The bike was too old. The design was too complicated. Whatever secret it held was locked away for good. The final expert to try was a man named Gary Fenwick, known across the country as one of the best motorcycle mechanics alive. He had a reputation for fixing things nobody else could touch. And when he arrived on Friday afternoon, the crowd outside the garage grew larger than it had been all week. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Gary walked in with the confidence of a man who had never failed at anything in his life. He worked for 3 hours in front of everyone, checking wires, testing connections, taking apart pieces of the engine that had not been touched in over a decade. Jack stood near the back of the garage, hope rising in his chest with every passing minute. But slowly, that hope began to fade, as Gary's face grew more frustrated, his movements more rushed. Finally, Gary stood up straight, took off his gloves, and turned to face the cameras that had been recording his every move. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Gary said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I'm telling you, this bike is done. It's not coming back. Sometimes you have to know when to walk away. Maybe it's time the Hells Angels admit this one's beat them." The room went quiet. Someone in the crowd whispered something to another person. A camera flash went off, capturing Jack's face as the words settled over him like a heavy blanket. Gary packed up his tools and left without looking back, the crowd slowly following him out until the garage was empty again. Jack stood alone in the dim light, staring at the motorcycle under its black cloth. He walked closer, placed his hand against the cold metal frame, and closed his eyes. "I'm not done, Thomas," he whispered. "I don't care how long it takes. I'm going to find the person who can bring you back. I promise you that." The next afternoon, the crowd outside the garage had not gone away. If anything, it had grown. News vans lined the street, their antennas pointed at the sky. Reporters stood in small clumps, holding coffee cups and talking about what Gary Fenwick had said the day before. Some of them had already started writing their stories about how the Hells Angels' famous motorcycle was nothing but a broken piece of history that would never run again. Jack sat inside the garage on an old wooden stool, staring at the black cloth covering the bike. He had not slept much. His eyes were tired, and his shoulders felt heavy, like he was carrying something none of the others could see. Around him, a few club members leaned against the walls, talking quietly, their voices low and tired too. That was when the door creaked open. A boy walked in. He looked no older than 17, thin and quiet, wearing a plain gray hoodie and jeans that had grease stains on the knees. In his hand, he carried a small metal toolbox, the kind you might find in someone's garage collecting dust for years. His hair was messy, like he had run his hand through it 100 times, and his eyes moved carefully around the room, taking in everything without saying a word. One of the older mechanics who had stayed behind to watch the chaos laughed out loud. "You lost, kid?" the man said, crossing his arms. "This ain't a school project." A few others chuckled too. Someone muttered something about how the kid probably wanted an autograph from all the famous mechanics who had come through that week. The laughter rolled through the garage like a wave, bouncing off the metal walls. The boy did not flinch. He stood a little straighter and looked toward Jack, ignoring the laughter completely. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'd like to take a look at the motorcycle, if that's all right." The laughter grew louder. One man slapped his knee, shaking his head. "You'd like to take a look? Kid, we had the best mechanics in the country in here this week. NASCAR guys, engineers, and you're carrying a toolbox that looks like it came from a garage sale." Ethan did not respond to the insult. He simply waited, his eyes fixed on Jack, patient and calm, like he had all the time in the world. Jack studied the boy for a long moment. There was something about him that felt different from all the others who had walked through those doors. The famous mechanics had come in loud, confident, talking about their reputations before they even touched a single bolt. This kid had walked in quiet, respectful, without a single word about how good he was, or how many bikes he had fixed before. "You know who built this bike?" Jack asked, his voice low. "Thomas Reed," Ethan answered without hesitation. "Your founder." That surprised a few people in the room. The laughter died down a little. "And you think you can fix what a dozen professionals couldn't?" Jack said, leaning forward on his stool. Ethan set his toolbox down gently on the concrete floor. "I don't know if I can fix it," he said honestly, "but I'd like to try. I think everybody's been looking at it the wrong way." "The wrong way?" One of the older men scoffed. "Kid, you don't even know what you're looking at." Ethan glanced at the covered bike, then back at Jack. "Sometimes the people who know the most end up missing the simplest things," he said quietly. "My grandfather used to tell me that all the time." Jack felt something stir inside him at those words. He was not sure why, but they landed somewhere deep, somewhere he had not expected. He studied Ethan's face again, the calm way the boy stood, unbothered by the laughter around him, unshaken by the doubt in the room. "Why do you think you can succeed where they failed?" Jack asked. Ethan met his eyes. "Because I'm not trying to prove I'm the best mechanic in the world," he said. "I just want to understand what's wrong. That's all." The room went quiet. Jack looked at the boy for a long moment, then stood up from his stool. "All right," Jack said. "You've got 5 minutes." The room went still as Jack pulled back the black cloth. The motorcycle sat there, exposed at last, its chrome dull from years of dust and neglect. It looked tired. Old. Like something that had given up waiting for someone to care about it. The seat was cracked. The handlebars had lost their shine. But even broken down like this, there was something about the machine that made people stop and stare, like it still held a kind of quiet power nobody could explain. Ethan knelt down beside it, slowly. He did not touch anything at first. He just looked. His eyes moved over every inch of the bike, from the front wheel to the back, studying the way the wires ran along the frame, the way the engine sat bolted into place. He tilted his head, listening even though the engine was not running, like he was trying to understand something the others could not see. "He's just staring at it," one of the older mechanics muttered, shaking his head. "That's real professional work right there." A few people chuckled, but Jack raised a hand, and the room quieted again. Ethan reached into his toolbox and pulled out a small flashlight, the kind you would find in a kitchen drawer. He clicked it on and leaned closer to the engine, shining the light into the tight spaces between the metal parts. His fingers moved carefully, brushing away years of dust with the gentleness of someone handling something fragile and precious. "Kid, we already checked the engine block 6 ways from Sunday," one man said. "Ain't nothing wrong with the mechanics. Everybody agrees on that." Ethan did not look up. "I'm not looking at the engine," he said quietly. "Not yet." He moved his hand along the wiring, following it with his fingers like he was reading Braille. His eyes narrowed slightly when he reached a spot near the base of the frame, where an old wire ran down and disappeared behind a metal bracket. He paused there. Something about it made him stop completely still. "What is it?" Jack asked, stepping closer. Ethan did not answer right away. He reached into his toolbox again and pulled out a small screwdriver, the kind that looked too simple for a machine this important. He crouched lower, angling his flashlight toward the bracket, and gently pressed his fingers against the metal. "There's a ground wire here," Ethan said, his voice calm but focused. "It's been repaired so many times that somebody covered it up without realizing it wasn't making contact anymore. It looks connected, but it's not really." The older mechanics exchanged glances. One of them frowned, stepping closer to look for himself. "That's impossible," he said. "We checked every wire on this thing, every single one." "You checked if the wire was there," Ethan said simply. "Not if it was touching where it needed to touch." Jack felt his heart begin to pound. The room had gone completely silent now, every eye locked on the boy kneeling beside the bike. Ethan loosened the small bolt holding the bracket in place. Underneath, hidden beneath years of grime and old electrical tape, was a tiny corroded connection point, dulled and disconnected just enough to break the flow of power without anyone noticing. It was such a small thing, almost invisible, the kind of detail a person could spend years searching for and never find, because nobody thought to look somewhere so simple. Ethan reached into his toolbox one more time and pulled out a small strip of sandpaper. He rubbed it gently against the corroded metal, cleaning away the buildup until the connection point shined again. Then he tightened the bracket back into place, secured the wire, and reached for the ignition. The garage held its breath. Jack's chest tightened. The reporters outside had no idea what was happening. The mechanics who had failed all week stood frozen, their arms crossed, their faces pale with disbelief. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes locked on the boy's steady hands. Ethan turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Just silence. Then the engine coughed once, twice, and then the motorcycle roared to life, the sound thundering through the garage like a wave crashing against the walls, shaking the tools on the shelves, echoing off the metal roof. The legendary machine that had sat silent for 12 years was finally, unmistakably, alive again. The next morning came bright and clear, the kind of sky that made the whole world look washed clean. Outside the garage, folding chairs had been set up in neat rows across the parking lot. A small stage stood at the front, decorated with a simple banner that read, Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club, in bold letters. Cameras from 3 different news stations pointed toward the stage, their operators checking angles and adjusting lenses. Jack stood near the back of the garage, wearing a clean leather vest instead of his usual worn one. He watched the crowd gather, feeling something heavy sit in his chest. Word had spread fast overnight. A 17-year-old boy had done what famous mechanics could not. Every news station in the state wanted to be there when the check was handed over. Marcus walked up beside him, arms crossed. "Big turnout," he said. "Yeah," Jack answered. "Bigger than I expected." Reporters pressed toward the front rows, microphones ready, cameras rolling. A young woman in a blue blazer stood near the stage, practicing her opening line under her breath. Everyone wanted the same story. A poor kid fixes an impossible motorcycle and walks away a millionaire overnight. It was the kind of story people loved. Ethan stood off to the side, wearing a plain gray shirt and jeans, looking small next to all the leather jackets and motorcycles parked around the lot. He held his grandfather's old toolbox in both hands, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping him steady. His parents stood nearby, his mother dabbing at her eyes, unable to believe what was happening to her quiet son. Jack walked over to him. "You ready, kid?" Ethan looked up. "I guess so." "You don't have to be nervous," Jack said. "You earned this. Nobody can take that away from you." Ethan nodded, but something in his eyes looked uncertain, like there was a weight sitting on him that had nothing to do with cameras or crowds. At exactly 10 o'clock, Jack stepped onto the small stage. The crowd quieted. He held a large check in his hands, the kind used for photographs, with $4.6 million printed in bold black letters across the front. "Yesterday," Jack began, his voice carrying across the lot. "Something happened in that garage that I don't think any of us will ever forget. A machine that sat broken for 12 years came back to life. Not because of the most expensive equipment, not because of the most famous names in the business, but because of a 17-year-old boy who looked at it differently than everyone else." The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. Ethan stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his stomach twisting into knots. "Ethan Cole," Jack said, waving him forward. "Come on up here." Ethan walked slowly onto the stage, the wooden boards creaking under his sneakers. Jack held out the giant check toward him, smiling wide, ready for the photograph that would run in every newspaper by tomorrow morning. But Ethan did not reach for it. He stood there, hands still wrapped around his grandfather's toolbox, looking out at the crowd of strangers waiting to see him smile and take the money. The silence stretched long enough that people in the front row began whispering to each other. "Ethan," Jack said quietly, leaning toward him. "You okay?" Ethan swallowed hard. Then he stepped up to the microphone. "I don't want the money," he said. The crowd went completely silent. Reporters lowered their notepads. Marcus, standing near the garage doors, straightened up like he had been slapped. "What?" Jack asked, stunned. "I didn't come here for a reward," Ethan continued, his voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. I came because I needed to prove something. Somebody important got forgotten, and I couldn't let that happen anymore." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Jack lowered the giant check slightly, staring at the boy in front of him like he was seeing him for the first time. "Forgotten?" Jack asked. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" Ethan took a breath, his fingers tightening around the handle of the old toolbox in his hands. "My grandfather built this motorcycle," he said, "alongside Thomas Reed. Nobody remembers his name. But I do." The silence after Ethan's words lasted only a moment before the whole lot erupted into noise. Reporters shouted questions over each other. Cameras flashed so fast it looked like lightning bouncing off the parking lot pavement. Jack held up a hand, and slowly, the noise died down enough for him to speak. "Everybody, just hold on," Jack said, his voice firm but not angry. "Let the kid talk." Ethan looked out at all the faces staring back at him. His hands were shaking, but he set his grandfather's toolbox down on the small stage and knelt beside it. He opened the latch. Inside, resting on top of old wrenches and rags, was a stack of worn notebooks, their covers cracked and yellowed with age. He lifted them out carefully, like they were made of glass. "These were my grandfather's," Ethan said, standing back up. "His name was Daniel Cole. He passed away 2 years ago. Before he died, he gave me these." He opened the top journal to a page filled with small, careful handwriting. Next to the writing were sketches, drawings of engine parts, wiring diagrams, notes scribbled in the margins. Jack stepped closer, squinting at the page. "He wrote everything down," Ethan continued. "Every repair he ever made, every mistake, every fix. He used to tell me that if you write things down, you never really lose them." Jack took the journal gently from Ethan's hands. He flipped through page after page, his eyes moving slowly, taking in the drawings. Then he stopped. His breath caught in his throat. There, sketched in fading pencil, was the motorcycle. The same one sitting inside the garage behind them. The same custom frame, the same handlebars, the same tank design. Underneath the drawing, in small, neat letters, were the words, "Reed's bike. Started April." "This is..." Jack's voice trailed off. "That's the motorcycle," Ethan said. "My grandfather helped build it. He worked with Thomas Reed for months, late at night, in a garage not much different from this one. He told me the story when I was little. I didn't understand it back then. I just thought it was a story my grandpa liked to tell." He reached into the toolbox again and pulled out a small stack of photographs, their edges worn soft from handling. He handed them to Jack. The photos showed 2 young men standing beside an unfinished motorcycle frame, both covered in grease, both smiling like they had just done something impossible. One of them, Jack recognized immediately. Thomas Reed, younger than Jack had ever seen him, eyes bright with pride. The other man, standing beside him with a wrench in his hand, Jack had never seen before in his life. "That's your grandfather?" Jack asked, holding up the photo. Ethan nodded. "Daniel Cole. He never told anyone outside the family that he helped build it. He said it wasn't about getting credit. He just wanted to help build something good." Jack stared at the photograph for a long moment, feeling something shift inside his chest. 12 years, the motorcycle had sat broken in the garage, treated like a sacred relic, a monument to Thomas Reed alone. And now here was proof, right in his hands, that someone else had poured just as much sweat and care into building it. "After he passed," Ethan said quietly, "I found these journals in a box in his garage. I read through every one of them. That's how I learned what I know. Not from a class, not from a shop. From him." Marcus had stepped closer during all this, standing just behind Jack's shoulder, his arms no longer crossed but hanging loose at his sides. He looked at the photograph, then at Ethan, his face unreadable. "Daniel Cole, Marcus repeated slowly, like he was testing the name in his mouth. I know that name. Jack turned to him. You do? Marcus's jaw tightened. There used to be records, old ones, from when the club first started. Names of everyone who helped build things, fix things, keep the place running. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Daniel Cole's name isn't in them. Not anymore. Jack frowned. What do you mean, not anymore? Marcus glanced away toward the garage, toward the motorcycle sitting silent and gleaming inside. I mean, somebody took it out. A long time ago, after some kind of falling out. He looked back at Jack, his expression heavy. There's history here, Jack. History some folks might not want dug back up. The clubhouse felt different in the morning light. Empty tables, cold coffee cups left from the night before. Jack sat at the head of the long wooden table, waiting for the men he had called here. Marcus arrived first, followed by two other older members Jack had known for over 20 years. Pete Alvarez had a limp from an accident back in the 90s. Gary Booth barely spoke anymore, but when he did, people listened. Thanks for coming, Jack said. I need to know about Daniel Cole. The three men exchanged glances. Pete rubbed his hands together like he was cold, even though the room was warm. He was good, Pete finally said. Better than good. Best set of hands I ever saw on an engine. Better than Reed, if I'm being honest, and Reed was no slouch. Then why isn't his name anywhere? Jack asked. Why did I never hear about him until yesterday? Gary cleared his throat. His voice came out rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. There was a disagreement, bad one. Nobody talks about it because nobody wants to remember how it ended. What kind of disagreement? Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table. Reed wanted to put Daniel's name on the record books, wanted to make him a full member, give him credit for the bike. But some of the older guys back then, the ones who ran things before us, they didn't like it. Said the club's name belonged to the club, said an outsider helping build something didn't make him family. That's ridiculous, Jack said. Maybe now it sounds that way, Pete said. Back then, things were different. People were scared of letting outsiders in too close. Daniel wasn't a member. He was just a guy from town who happened to be a genius with engines. Reed brought him in because he trusted him. But when it came time to give him credit, the old guard shut it down hard. So Daniel just walked away? Gary nodded slowly. Walked away and never came back. Reed tried to make it right, but by then the damage was done. Daniel told him he didn't need his name on anything, said the bike would speak for itself. Then he disappeared from the club's life completely. Jack sat back in his chair, feeling something heavy settle into his chest. 12 years he had looked at that motorcycle like it was a monument to one man alone. Now he understood it had never been that simple. I want to see the old records, Jack said. The real ones. Whatever's left. Marcus hesitated, then nodded and led him down to the small back room where the club kept its history. Boxes of photographs, ledgers, and handwritten notes filled metal shelves that hadn't been touched in years. Dust floated in the light from a single bulb overhead. Jack dug through box after box until he found what he was looking for. An old ledger, its leather cover cracked, listing names of everyone who had contributed to the club's early projects. He flipped to the page for the motorcycle. Thomas Reed's name was there, written in bold, confident letters. Below it, Jack noticed something strange. A line had been scratched out, the ink smeared like someone had tried to erase it entirely. He held the page up to the light. Underneath the scratch marks, he could barely make out the faint outline of another name. Daniel Cole. Someone had taken a pen and deliberately crossed him out of history, not just forgotten, erased on purpose. Jack set the ledger down on the table, his hands trembling slightly. He thought about Ethan standing on that stage yesterday, holding his grandfather's journals like they were sacred treasures. He thought about the pride in the boy's voice when he talked about Daniel, about a man who never wanted credit but deserved it more than anyone. "We can't leave it like this," Jack said quietly. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face tight with worry. "Jack, some of the guys who did this, they're still around. Old friends of ours. Bringing this back up, it's going to open wounds that took years to close." Jack looked down at the erased name one more time. Then he looked up at Marcus. "Wounds that never healed right don't stay closed forever," Jack said. "They just wait." Ethan showed up at the garage a little before 10, carrying a cardboard box that looked like it had been through a lot of moves over the years. The corners were soft and worn. Someone had written "Dad's Shop Stuff" on the side in faded marker, though Jack figured that must have been Ethan's own father, keeping the things his son would one day need. "I found more," Ethan said, setting the box on the workbench near the motorcycle. "In the attic. My mom forgot this was even up there." Jack wiped his hands on a shop rag and came over. "You didn't have to bring all this today?" "I wanted to." Ethan opened the flaps carefully, like the box held something breakable. "After what you said yesterday, about wanting to understand him better, I thought you should see the rest." Inside were more journals, older than the ones Ethan had already shared, their covers softer and more worn from handling. There were also loose papers, folded many times, and a small tin box that rattled when Ethan lifted it out. He opened the tin to show Jack a collection of old photographs, curled at the edges and yellowed with age. Jack picked up one of the photographs. It showed a young man standing next to a half-built motorcycle, grinning at the camera with grease smudged across his cheek. Even without being told, Jack knew he was looking at Daniel Cole. "He looks happy," Jack said quietly. "He was, back then," Ethan said. "At least that's what my mom always told me. She said something changed him for a while. He got quiet about the club. Never talked bad about it, though. Never once." Jack set the photograph down and reached for one of the journals. This one was older than the others, its pages soft and yellowed. He opened it carefully and began to read. Daniel's handwriting filled the pages small and neat, describing engine problems and solutions in plain, simple words. But scattered between the technical notes were other kinds of writing. Personal thoughts, small reminders to himself. One page read, "Fixed the Miller boy's truck today. Charged him nothing. He's got 3 younger siblings and a mother working 2 jobs. The look on his face was worth more than money ever could be." Another page said, "Taught a group of kids at the community center how engines work. They asked so many questions I lost track of time. This is what matters, not the club, not the credit, just this." Jack kept turning pages, and the pattern continued. Daniel had spent years teaching people, helping neighbors, fixing things for free when someone couldn't afford it. There was no bitterness in any of the words, no anger toward the club or the men who had erased his name. Just a quiet man who loved his work and loved helping others do the same. "He never hated us," Jack said, almost to himself. "No," Ethan said. "He used to tell my mom that holding on to anger was like carrying a toolbox full of broken parts, heavy and useless. He said it was better to build something new instead." Jack closed the journal slowly and looked at Ethan. The boy stood there quietly, hands in his pockets, waiting without pushing. Jack thought about the erased name in the old ledger, the smeared ink hiding a man who had given so much and asked for nothing in return. "Your grandfather was a better man than most people I've known," Jack said, "present company included." Ethan's cheeks went a little red, but he didn't look away. "I just want people to know who he really was. That's all I ever wanted." Jack nodded slowly, feeling the weight of a decision settling into place. "I'm going to fix this, Ethan. His name is going back where it belongs. In the records, next to Reed's, right where it should have been all along." Ethan's eyes brightened, but Jack held up a hand before the boy could say anything. "I need you to understand something first," Jack said. "Not everyone is going to like this. Some of the older members have believed a certain story for 30 years. People get attached to the stories they've told themselves, even when those stories aren't true. Changing that isn't going to be easy. There might be pushback. There might be people who get angry." Ethan's expression steadied, the brightness settling into something firmer and more resolved. "My grandfather waited a long time for someone to remember him right. I can wait a little longer for people to accept it." The clubhouse meeting room smelled like coffee and old leather. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, and every seat was taken by Thursday night. Word had gotten around fast that Jack had called a full meeting, the kind reserved for important club business. Nobody knew exactly what it was about, but the whispers had already started. Jack stood at the front of the room, near a whiteboard nobody ever used. The motorcycle waited in the garage next door, close enough that everyone in the room could feel its presence even without seeing it. "Thanks for coming," Jack started. His voice was steady, though his hands rested on the back of a chair like he needed something to hold on to. "I've got something to share, and I want you all to hear it from me before it gets twisted into something else." Marcus Vance sat near the front, arms crossed, his gray beard trimmed neat as always. He gave Jack a small nod, the kind that said, "Get on with it." 12 years ago, this club lost the ability to start Thomas Reed's motorcycle," Jack said. "A few weeks back, a 17-year-old kid walked in here and fixed it in under a minute. Some of you were there. Some of you heard about it after." A murmur passed through the room. Everyone had heard the story by now, though most still didn't believe it. "What most of you don't know," Jack continued, "is why that kid knew exactly what to look for. His name is Ethan Cole. His grandfather was Daniel Cole." Jack paused, letting the name settle into the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Daniel Cole helped Thomas build that motorcycle. He wasn't just some mechanic who touched it once. He was there from the start. And somewhere along the way, his name got erased from our records." The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than silence usually did. Marcus stood up first. "Where did you get that information?" "Journals," Jack said. "Written in Daniel's own hand, photographs. And I found the old ledger in the archive room. His name was there once, Marcus. It's smudged out now, but it's there." "Smudged out doesn't mean erased on purpose," Marcus said, his voice tightening. "Could have been an accident, water damage, age." "I don't think it was an accident," Jack said quietly, "and I think some of you know more about what happened back then than you're saying." A younger member near the back, Jake Thompson, leaned forward in his seat. "If it's true, we should be proud of it. Another good man who helped build something that means everything to this club. Why would that hurt anything?" "Because it changes the story we've told for 30 years, an older member named Rollins said, his voice sharp. "Thomas Reed built that bike. That's the story. That's what we've honored every single year. Now we're supposed to say somebody else helped, somebody nobody's heard of, and that's supposed to sit fine with everybody?" "It's supposed to sit fine because it's true," Jake shot back. "Truth isn't always kind, boy," Rollins said. "Sometimes it just makes a mess." More voices joined in, some rising to defend Daniel's memory, others insisting the club's history should stay exactly as it had always been told. Jack watched the room split down an invisible line, younger members leaning toward Jake's side, older ones gathering closer to Marcus and Rollins. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted, some standing, some crossing their arms tighter. "This isn't about tearing down Thomas," Jack said, raising his voice enough to cut through the noise. It's about telling the whole story instead of half of it. But the words didn't land the way he hoped. Marcus shook his head slowly and turned toward the door. Several older members followed him without another word, their boots heavy against the floor. Others stayed, but the room felt fractured, split into pieces that didn't fit together anymore. The meeting ended without a vote, without an agreement, without anything settled. People filed out in small groups, quiet arguments still trailing behind them into the parking lot. Jack stayed behind. He walked into the garage alone, the motorcycle sitting there under the dim overhead light, chrome catching the glow like a memory refusing to fade. He rested his hand on the leather seat, feeling the quiet weight of everything unresolved pressing down on his shoulders. The club he loved was divided, and he had no idea yet how to bring it back together. Several days later, the garage looked nothing like Jack remembered. Instead of quiet and shadows, the space buzzed with voices. Bicycles leaned against the far wall, some missing chains, some with flat tires, one with handlebars twisted sideways like it had been in a fight. A rusty old moped sat near the door, and next to it, a lawnmower engine had been taken apart piece by piece and laid out on a blue tarp like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Ethan stood in the middle of it all, sleeves rolled up, grease already smudged across his knuckles. Around him stood 5 teenagers from the neighborhood, kids Jack recognized from around town but had never really talked to. A girl named Priya crouched next to the moped, squinting at the engine. A tall, skinny kid named Marcus, no relation to Marcus Vance, held a wrench like he wasn't quite sure which end to use. "You're overthinking it," Ethan said, kneeling next to Priya. His voice was calm, the same steady tone Jack remembered from the day the motorcycle roared back to life. "Feel here." He guided her hand to a loose bolt near the engine. "What does that tell you?" Priya frowned, concentrating. "It's loose." "Right. So what happens when a bolt's loose?" "It vibrates. Doesn't hold steady." "Exactly." Ethan smiled, just a small one, but it was enough to make Priya sit up a little straighter. "You just diagnosed a problem. That's the hard part. The rest is just tightening a bolt." Jack stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching quietly. He hadn't planned on staying long. He'd only come to drop off some old tools from the back room, thinking they might be useful. But he found himself lingering, drawn into the scene like it was a story he needed to keep reading. Across the garage, Jake Thompson was helping the skinny kid named Marcus figure out the wrench situation, showing him the difference between a socket wrench and an adjustable one. Jake had been coming by every day since the meeting, saying less about club politics and more about grip patterns and gear ratios. Jack noticed the change, but hadn't said anything about it yet. "Try it now," Ethan told Priya, stepping back from the moped. Priya turned the key. The little engine coughed, sputtered, then caught, settling into a steady hum. Her eyes went wide. She looked up at Ethan, then at Jack, then back at the moped, like she couldn't quite believe the sound was real. "I did that?" she asked. "You did that," Ethan said. Priya laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone. She ran her hand along the moped's seat like it was something precious now, something she'd earned instead of something broken and forgotten. Jack felt something tighten in his chest, though it wasn't the same heaviness he'd carried since the meeting. This was different. Warmer. He thought about the kids who came through that door each day. Priya, who barely said a word the first time she showed up, now grinning ear to ear over a fixed engine. The skinny kid, Marcus, who used to slouch like he was trying to disappear, now standing straighter every time Jake handed him a new tool to try. A boy named Dell, who hadn't spoken more than 2 sentences all week, quietly sanding down a bike frame in the corner, focused in a way Jack hadn't seen from anyone in a long time. None of them had asked for recognition. None of them cared about reward money or reputation. They just wanted to learn, to build something, to feel like their hands could create instead of only break. Jack's eyes drifted toward the motorcycle, still resting on its stand near the back wall, chrome gleaming under the shop lights. He thought about Thomas Reed, a man he'd only known through stories and old photographs, a man who supposedly built that machine as a symbol of unity and hope. Maybe the bike had never been about the club alone. Maybe it was never meant to sit behind glass, admired but untouched, a monument to the past. Maybe Thomas Reed's real dream had nothing to do with chrome or engines at all. Jack watched Ethan crouch down again, this time helping Dell with the bike frame, patient and steady, never once raising his voice or showing frustration. He wondered for the first time if the true legacy Thomas left behind wasn't the motorcycle at all. It was this, right here. Kids finding their hands could build instead of break. Jack found the box in the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet, tucked behind a stack of expired insurance papers nobody had looked at in years. It was a Tuesday night, the garage empty except for him and a single work lamp throwing yellow light across the desk. He almost missed it. The box was small, cardboard, soft at the corners from age. Inside were photographs, black and white, curling at the edges. Jack lifted them out one at a time, careful, like they might crumble if he moved too fast. The first photo showed Thomas Reed standing next to the motorcycle frame, younger than Jack had ever seen him, grinning with grease on his cheek. Next to him stood another man, tall, lean, holding a wrench in one hand and squinting against the sun. Jack turned the photo over. Written on the back, in faded pencil, were 4 words: Daniel and Thomas. 1974. His hands went still. He found more, a photo of Daniel welding the frame, sparks caught mid-air by the old camera, a photo of both men laughing over the engine, tools scattered around them like they'd been working for hours. And at the very bottom of the box, a folded piece of paper, brittle and yellowed, listing parts and measurements in 2 different sets of handwriting. Jack recognized one set immediately. He'd seen it in Ethan's journals, the same careful slant, the same way the letter T got crossed with a quick, confident line. He sat there for a long time, holding the paper, feeling something settle deep in his chest. There was no more question left. No more doubt to argue with Marcus about. No more gaps in the story. Daniel Cole had built that motorcycle right alongside Thomas Reed, hands in the same grease, sweat from the same long nights. It was time to make it right. The ceremony took place on a Saturday afternoon, out in the lot behind the garage where the club held its bigger gatherings. Folding chairs stretched in rows facing a small stage Jake and the other young members had built out of plywood and sawhorses. String lights hung overhead even though the sun hadn't set yet, waiting for evening. People came from all over. Club members in their leather vests, neighborhood families who'd heard about the repair center, kids who'd spent their afternoons fixing bicycles and mopeds in that garage. Priya sat near the front with her parents, still talking about her moped to anyone who'd listen. Dell stood near the back with his mother, quiet as always, but watching everything closely. The motorcycle sat at the center of the stage, polished until it gleamed under the string lights, chrome catching every bit of afternoon sun. Jack stepped up to the small podium, the microphone crackling once before settling. He looked out at the crowd, his throat tight in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. "For 12 years, he said, this motorcycle sat in our garage like something we were afraid to touch. We told ourselves it belonged to Thomas Reed. Just Thomas Reed. And that's true. He built it. He believed in it." He paused, looking down at the photographs in his hand. "But he didn't build it alone." Jack held up the first photograph, turning it so the crowd could see. A murmur went through the rows of chairs. "This is Daniel Cole," Jack said. "He worked beside Thomas Reed for months, welding, wiring, shaping every piece of this machine. And when things fell apart between them, his name got erased. Not because he did anything wrong, because somebody decided pride mattered more than the truth." He looked toward the front row, where Ethan sat between Jack's own seat and an empty chair reserved for him. "That ends today." Jack reached down and lifted a small brass plaque, freshly engraved, and fastened it to the display stand beside the motorcycle. 2 names now, side by side, etched into the metal. Thomas Reed, Daniel Cole. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, some calling out Daniel's name like they'd known him all along. Ethan sat frozen for a moment, eyes fixed on the plaque, on his grandfather's name shining under the string lights beside the man he'd helped for so many years without recognition. Then Ethan stood too, slowly, and Jack watched something shift across the boy's face, grief and pride tangled together, impossible to separate. The motorcycle gleamed behind them both, finally telling the whole story it had carried in silence for so long. Sunday morning came bright and clear, the kind of sky that seemed to stretch on forever without a single cloud to break it up. By 9 o'clock, the street outside the garage was already lined with motorcycles, dozens of them, chrome catching the early sun like scattered stars. Jack stood near the front, checking the straps on his jacket, watching the crowd grow. Families had come with lawn chairs and coolers, setting up along the route like they were waiting for a parade. Veterans in old service caps stood near the curb, some saluting as club members rolled their bikes into formation. Kids from the neighborhood ran between the rows of motorcycles, wide-eyed, pointing at the shiny paint and loud pipes. At the center of it all sat the restored motorcycle, engine idling low and steady, the sound rolling out across the street like a heartbeat. Ethan sat on the porch steps of the garage, watching Jack swing a leg over the seat. "You sure you don't want to ride it?" Jack called out. Ethan shook his head, smiling. "It's not my ride to take, not today." Jack nodded, understanding. Some things belonged to everybody, not just the person who fixed them. The ride stretched for miles, winding through town, past the old diner where Thomas Reed used to eat breakfast, past the community center that still smelled like fresh paint, past the school where half the neighborhood kids spent their days. People stood on porches and sidewalks, waving as the motorcycles rumbled by. A woman held up a handmade sign that read, "Thank you, Daniel and Thomas." Jack caught sight of it just as he passed, and something in his chest tightened, warm and full. By the time the ride circled back to the garage, the sun had climbed high overhead, and everyone gathered in the lot again, laughing, eating, trading stories about the day. Priya's father grilled hot dogs on a small, portable grill he'd hauled over in his truck. Del sat with a group of boys his age, showing off a wrench he'd borrowed from the shop, explaining how torque worked like he'd known it his whole life. Jack watched it all from a folding chair near the garage doors, a paper plate balanced on his knee, untouched. Ethan came and sat beside him as the sun started sinking low, painting the sky orange and pink. The noise of the crowd had settled into something quieter, more comfortable, the kind of tired happiness that came after a long, good day. "You did something today," Jack said. Something bigger than fixing a motorcycle. Ethan looked out at the lot, at Dell laughing with the other boys, at Priya's parents still talking with Sarah Whitmore near the folding tables. "I keep thinking about my grandfather," Ethan said. "How he used to say the most important thing wasn't what you built. It was who you built it with." Jack nodded slowly. He was right. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the last of the daylight fade behind the rooftops. "I want to do more," Ethan said finally. "Not just fixing bikes on weekends, a real place. Somewhere kids like Dell and Priya can come every day, learn real skills, work with their hands. Somewhere they feel like they matter." Jack turned to look at him. Really look, the way he had that first day Ethan walked into the garage carrying nothing but a small toolbox, and a quiet kind of confidence nobody had expected. "You're talking about a shop," Jack said. "A real one. Tools, workbenches, someone teaching classes." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Something that lasts. Something that doesn't depend on me being around forever." Jack thought about the $4.6 million sitting untouched, waiting for a purpose bigger than a reward. He thought about Thomas Reed's letter, about Daniel Cole's forgotten years, about everything that had led them here, to this exact moment, sitting side by side in the fading light. "We'll find a way," Jack said. "I promise you that. Whatever it takes, we're going to build that place." Ethan smiled, small and tired, and full of something like hope. Somewhere behind them, the motorcycle sat quiet now, engine cooled, chrome catching the last streaks of sunset. The morning came gray, the kind of sky that felt like it hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. Jack was already at the garage, wiping down the counter, when a black sedan pulled up outside, clean and shiny compared to the trucks and bikes usually parked along the curb. A man in a gray suit stepped out. He carried a leather briefcase and had the careful walk of someone who didn't spend much time in places like this. He looked at the garage sign, then at the motorcycle sitting near the back wall, then back at his phone like he was checking an address. Jack set down his rag and walked to the door. "Help you with something?" "I'm looking for Ethan Cole," the man said. "My name is Gregory Hale. I'm an attorney representing Robert Cole." Jack felt something tighten in his stomach, though he kept his face calm. "Robert Cole?" "Daniel Cole's nephew," Hale said. "He's a distant relative, but a relative all the same. He has some concerns about ownership of certain materials, journals, sketches, personal items belonging to Daniel Cole." Behind Jack, footsteps came down the stairs from the small apartment above the garage, where Ethan had taken to staying some nights, close to the shop and the community center project. Ethan appeared in the doorway, hair still messy from sleep, and stopped when he saw the stranger. "What's going on?" Ethan asked. Hale turned toward him, opening his briefcase with practiced ease. "Ethan Cole. I represent Robert Cole, a relative of your late grandfather. My client believes the journals currently in your possession, the ones being used publicly and referenced in the community center's founding materials, are part of Daniel Cole's estate. He's filed a claim asserting rightful ownership." Ethan blinked, not understanding at first. Then the words settled in, heavy and cold. "Ownership? Those are my grandfather's journals. He gave them to me before he died." "Was there a will?" Hale asked, not unkindly, but with the flat tone of someone who had asked that question 100 times before. "Any documentation showing formal transfer of these items to you?" Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. There hadn't been a will. Daniel hadn't thought he had anything worth writing one for. He'd just handed Ethan the old wooden box one afternoon, told him to take care of it, and that had been that. No paper, no lawyer, just a grandfather trusting his grandson. "He gave them to me," Ethan said again, quieter this time. That has to count for something. It might, Hale said, but without documentation, my client has a legitimate claim, especially given the historical and now financial value these materials appear to hold. He handed Jack a folded paper. This explains the details. My client isn't looking to cause trouble. He simply wants what he believes belongs to his family. Jack took the paper without looking at it, his jaw tight. The journals are what taught this boy how to save something the whole club thought was gone for good. They're what brought Daniel's name back after your client's family let it disappear for decades. Hale's expression didn't change. I understand this is emotional. I'm only delivering the claim. He closed his briefcase, nodded once, and walked back to his car without another word. The street felt quiet after the car pulled away, the kind of quiet that pressed down on a person's chest. Ethan sat down hard on the porch step, staring at nothing. They can't take them, he said. Those journals are the only thing I have left of him. His handwriting, his voice, everything he taught me is in there. Jack sat down beside him, the folded paper still in his hand. We're not going to let that happen. You don't know that, Ethan said, and for the first time since Jack had met him, the boy sounded scared. Not of failing, not of being laughed at, scared of losing the one thing that connected him to his grandfather. I know we're going to fight for it, Jack said, whatever it takes. Your grandfather's name isn't disappearing again, not after everything we've done to bring it back. Ethan nodded, though his eyes stayed fixed on the empty street where the car had been. Jack sat there a while longer, saying nothing more, the paper heavy in his hand. Inside, a worry had already started to form, quiet and unwelcome, about what a fight like this could do to everything they'd just built. The clubhouse smelled like coffee and old leather, and by the time Jack walked in that evening, the room was already full of voices that stopped the second he stepped through the door. That kind of quiet meant trouble. Marcus Vance stood near the pool table, arms crossed, his gray beard catching the light from the single hanging bulb above. Jake Thompson sat on a stool nearby, not saying much, just watching. 6 or 7 other members filled the rest of the room, some standing, some leaning against the wall. We need to talk about the money, Marcus said, before Jack even had his jacket off. Jack hung it on the hook by the door anyway, taking his time. Which money? You know which money, Marcus said. The $4.6 million. It was supposed to go to whoever fixed the bike. Fine. The kid fixed it. But now there's talk of giving it all away to build some repair shop for neighborhood kids. That was never the deal. The deal was the reward belonged to the club to offer, Jack said, which means it belongs to the club to decide what happens with it. Exactly, Marcus said, like Jack had just proved his point. So let the club decide. We've got bikes falling apart. Clubhouse needs a new roof. We could set aside money for members' families, help brothers with medical bills. That's $4.6 million, Jack. That kind of money could set this club up for the next 20 years. A few heads nodded around the room. Jake didn't nod, but he didn't argue either. You really think that's what this was about? Jack asked, keeping his voice level. You think Thomas built that motorcycle so we could argue about who gets to spend the money it earned? I think Thomas would want the club taken care of, Marcus said. He gave everything to this brotherhood. Maybe honoring him means making sure the people he built this for don't struggle? Jack looked around the room, at faces he'd ridden beside for 20 years, men who'd stood by him through funerals and hospital visits and long nights when nobody else showed up. He understood the fear underneath Marcus's words. Nobody wanted the club to be forgotten either. You all remember why that bike sat untouched for 12 years? Jack asked. Because it wasn't just a machine. It was Thomas's message. He built it to prove people written off by everybody else could still matter. That a person's worth isn't about what they can produce, or what somebody's willing to pay for it. That's a nice story, one of the younger members said from the back. Doesn't pay for a new roof. No, Jack said. It doesn't. But I didn't put up that reward to buy a roof. I put it up because I wanted the world to see that this club still believes in something bigger than itself. And then a 17-year-old boy walked in here, fixed what nobody else could, and told us he didn't want a dime of it. You all heard him say that. The room stayed quiet. He didn't want money, Jack continued. He wanted his grandfather remembered. That's it. That's the whole thing he was after. And now we're sitting here arguing about keeping cash that a kid with more character than half the grown men in this room didn't even want for himself. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer right away. You want to know what honoring Thomas looks like, Jack said. It doesn't look like hoarding money because we're scared of running out. It looks like giving it away for something that actually matters. Building a place where kids like Ethan, kids who feel invisible, get a chance to find out what they're capable of. And if it fails? Marcus asked. If we hand over millions and it falls apart in a year? Then at least we tried to build something worth building, Jack said, instead of just protecting what we already have. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Jake finally looked up from his stool, quiet, thinking. Jack grabbed his jacket off the hook, pulling it back on. The money was never the goal, he said, more to himself now than to the room. I need every one of you to understand that before this goes any further. The garage was empty by the time Jack found Ethan there, kneeling beside the motorcycle with a flashlight in his teeth and his grandfather's old journal open on the concrete floor beside him. Thought you'd be home by now, Jack said. Ethan took the flashlight out of his mouth. I keep thinking there's more. My grandpa's notes mention a spot under the seat pan. Something about a place he called safe. I looked there twice already. Found nothing. Jack pulled a stool over and sat down, watching the boy work. There was something about the way Ethan touched the machine. Careful, patient, like it was alive and could feel pain if handled wrong. Read me that part again, Jack said. Ethan flipped back a few pages, found the line, and read it out loud. Told Thomas I'd hide the important thing somewhere only a real mechanic would find it, somewhere careless hands would miss. Jack frowned, thinking. Somewhere careless hands would miss, he repeated. Every mechanic who worked on this thing before you tore into the engine like they were trying to win a fight with it. They weren't careful. They were fast. Ethan's eyes lit up. He crawled underneath the bike, shining the flashlight along the frame near the rear fender, a spot most mechanics would never think twice about because it looked like solid metal. Jack, Ethan said quietly, come look at this. Jack knelt down beside him, his knees cracking from age. Ethan pointed to a small section of the frame that looked slightly different from the rest. A seam so fine it would take someone truly looking to notice it. That's not original, Ethan said. That's a patch. He reached into his toolbox and pulled out a thin, flathead screwdriver. Working slowly, he pressed the tip into the seam and gave it a careful twist. The metal panel popped loose with a soft click, revealing a small, hollow compartment built into the frame itself. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, wrapped in a thin plastic sleeve to protect it. Jack's breath caught in his chest. Get it out. Careful now. Ethan slid the paper out gently, unwrapping the plastic with trembling hands. He unfolded it slowly, the creases stiff from decades of being pressed shut. The handwriting was neat, steady, written by a man who took his time with things that mattered. Ethan cleared his throat and began to read out loud. If you're reading this, it means someone finally cared enough to look past what's broken and find what's hidden. This bike was never about me. I didn't build it to prove I was the best mechanic, or the strongest leader, or the smartest man in the room. I built it because a friend named Daniel Cole taught me that the best things in this world are made by more than one set of hands. Ethan's voice wavered slightly, but he kept reading. Daniel never wanted credit. He believed the work itself was the reward. I spent years wishing I'd fought harder to make sure people knew what he gave to this club. I never did. That's my biggest regret. So if you're standing here now, holding this letter, I'm asking you to finish what I couldn't. Give someone a chance the way Daniel gave me one. Not because they've proven themselves already, but because you believe they might. That's what this club was supposed to be. Not a wall keeping people out, a door letting people in. Ethan stopped reading, staring at the last line for a long moment before looking up at Jack. Neither of them said anything right away. The garage felt different somehow, heavier and lighter at the same time. Jack finally spoke, his voice rough. 12 years, he said. 12 years this bike sat here, and none of us understood what he was trying to tell us. He wasn't waiting for the right mechanic, Ethan said slowly, like he was working it out as he spoke. He was waiting for the right person. Jack looked at the boy kneeling beside him, 17 years old, holding a piece of history that had been buried inside cold metal for decades. He thought about every professional who had come through that garage door with expensive tools and famous names, all of them trying to fix an engine when the real thing broken was something else entirely. Ethan hadn't just repaired a motorcycle. He had done exactly what Thomas asked for in that letter, long before he ever knew the words existed. He had given something old a second chance. He had given a forgotten man his name back. Jack stood up slowly, his mind already turning toward tomorrow, toward Marcus and the club, and the money sitting untouched in an account that suddenly felt like it belonged to something far bigger than any of them had imagined. The next morning, the clubhouse smelled like coffee and gasoline, the same as it had for 30 years. Jack stood at the front of the room, the folded letter in his hand, and watched the members file in one by one. Marcus came in last, arms crossed, his jaw set the way it always got when he sensed something was about to change. "Sit down," Jack said. "All of you. This won't take long, but I need you to listen." Chairs scraped against the concrete floor. Some of the younger guys, Jake Thompson among them, leaned forward with their elbows on their knees. The older members, the ones who had ridden with Thomas Reed himself, sat back with their arms folded, wary. Jack held up the letter. "Found this last night, hidden inside the frame of the motorcycle. Thomas wrote it himself, a long time ago, and hid it somewhere he figured only the right person would ever find it." Marcus shifted in his seat. "What's it say?" Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he unfolded the paper carefully, the way Ethan had the night before, like it might crumble if he moved too fast. Then he began to read. His voice was steady at first, but by the time he reached the part about Daniel Cole, something in his throat tightened. He read about the friend who never wanted credit. He read about the regret Thomas carried for years, the wish that he had fought harder to make sure people knew what Daniel had given. He read the final words slowly, letting each one land. "Not a wall keeping people out, a door letting people in." The room stayed quiet for a long moment after he finished. Nobody moved. Somewhere outside, a truck rumbled past on the street, and a dog barked twice, and then it was quiet again. Marcus was the first to speak. His voice came out rougher than usual. 12 years, he said, echoing what Jack had said the night before. "We kept that bike like a shrine, polished it, protected it, and the whole time we had it backwards. We thought protecting his memory meant keeping things the way they were," Jack said. "Thomas didn't want a museum. He wanted a door." Jake Thompson sat forward, his hands clasped together. "So what happens now?" Jack folded the letter and set it down on the table in front of him, smoothing it flat with his palm. "Now we stop arguing about who deserves that reward money, because I already know who it belongs to." A few of the older members exchanged glances. One of them, a big man named Ray, who had been with the club almost as long as Marcus, cleared his throat. "Jack, that's $4.6 million. Club's got needs, repairs on the building, bikes that need work, dues that haven't covered half of what we owe this year." "I know," Jack said, "and none of that matters as much as what Thomas just told us." He looked around the room, meeting each set of eyes one at a time. Marcus, Ray, Jake. The younger prospects, standing near the back wall, who hadn't even been born when the motorcycle was built. "We're going to open a community center," Jack said, "named after Daniel Cole. A place where kids like Ethan can learn what he knows, where nobody gets laughed at for being 17 and quiet and carrying a toolbox. Nobody thinks means anything. Every dollar of that reward goes into building it, running it, keeping the doors open for as long as this club exists." Silence again, but different this time. Not the heavy kind, the kind that comes right before something shifts. Marcus rubbed a hand over his face. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, though he'd never admit it out loud. "Thomas would have liked that," he said quietly. "A door instead of a wall." Jack nodded. "Yeah, he would have." Jake Thompson stood up first, followed by two of the younger members, then Ray, then finally Marcus himself, until the whole room was on its feet. Nobody clapped, nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that, steadier, like something finally settling into place after being tilted for 12 long years. Jack picked the letter back up and held it against his chest for a moment before speaking again. "Daniel Cole is getting his name back," he said. "Starting today." The lawyer's office sat on the third floor of a building downtown, all glass and gray carpet, the kind of place that smelled like paper and air conditioning. Jack felt out of place the second he walked in, his leather vest and heavy boots looking wrong against the polished floors. He didn't care. He'd worn worse places before, and he wasn't about to let a fancy office make him nervous about something this important. Robert Cole was already seated at the conference table when Jack walked in. He was a thin man, maybe 50 years old, with careful eyes and a manila folder in front of him that he kept touching like it might get away from him. He stood when Jack entered, offering a handshake that felt stiff and unsure. "Mr. Mercer," Robert said, "thank you for coming." "Jack's fine," Jack said, taking the seat across from him. "Figured it was time we talked face-to-face instead of through lawyers." Robert's own lawyer, a younger woman with a briefcase full of papers, sat quietly beside him. Robert glanced at her, then back at Jack. "I want to be clear," he said. "This isn't about money. My family has almost nothing left that belonged to Daniel. Those journals, his tools, his handwriting. It's all we have of him." "I understand that," Jack said. "I do. But I need you to understand something, too." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder of his own, worn at the edges, the papers inside slightly crumpled from being read too many times. He set it on the table but didn't open it yet. "This isn't about taking anything from your family," Jack said. "I'm not here to fight you for ownership. I don't care whose name is on a piece of paper. What I care about is making sure people know what Daniel did. For 30 years, this club acted like that motorcycle built itself. Like Thomas Reed did it alone. That was wrong. Daniel deserves better than being erased." Robert's jaw tightened. "And how do I know that once you have those journals, you won't do the same thing? Take his work, put your club's name on it, and forget where it came from?" It was a fair question. Jack didn't get angry at it. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected exactly that concern. "Because Ethan is the one running this," Jack said. "Not me. Not the club. Him. Everything gets built with his input, his name attached, his grandfather's name on the front door. But there's something else I want you to see first." He opened the folder and slid Thomas Reed's letter across the table. Robert looked at it for a long moment before picking it up. His lawyer leaned in slightly, reading over his shoulder, but Robert waved a hand for quiet as he read. The paper trembled slightly in his fingers. Jack watched his eyes move across the lines, watched them stop at certain places, watched something shift in his face when he reached the part about Daniel walking away without ever asking for what he'd earned. When Robert finished, he set the letter down gently, like it was something fragile. "He never told anyone," Robert said quietly. "My father used to talk about Daniel sometimes. Said he left the club angry, that something happened he never wanted to discuss. We always figured he'd been pushed out, treated badly." He looked up at Jack. "We didn't know he left because he was too proud to fight for credit that should have been his." "That's who he was," Jack said. "Ethan says it's all through the journals, too. A man who cared more about doing good work than getting praised for it." Robert was quiet for a while, his hand still resting near the letter. Outside the window, traffic moved along the street below, small and distant. "The community center," Robert said finally. "Tell me about it again, exactly what it's for." Jack leaned forward. "A place for kids like Ethan. Kids who get overlooked, who don't fit the mold, who might have something real to offer if somebody just gave them the tools and the chance. Daniel's name on the door. His journal's inside, so kids can actually learn from what he wrote, not just hear stories about him." Robert looked at his lawyer, then back at Jack. He was quiet for another long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the letter one last time. "All right," he said. "The journals go to the center. All of it. Daniel deserved better than what my family gave him by staying quiet all these years. Might as well fix that now." The building sat on the corner of 5th and Main, empty for 6 years before Jack found it. The windows were broken, the roof leaked, and pigeons had made a home in the rafters. Most people walking by would have called it a lost cause. Jack looked at it and saw exactly what it needed to become. "It's a mess," Marcus said, standing beside him on the cracked sidewalk that first morning, hands on his hips. "Yeah," Jack agreed. "So was the bike, before Ethan touched it." Marcus grunted, but there was something different in his face now. He'd come around slower than most, but he'd come around. He rolled up his sleeves and grabbed a crowbar from the truck bed. "Well, let's get to it then." Word spread fast through the club, and faster through the neighborhood. Within a week, the empty lot beside the building was full of trucks and motorcycles. Some belonged to Hell's Angels members, their leather vests replaced with old T-shirts stained with paint and sawdust. Others belonged to people Jack had never met before, neighbors who'd heard about the project from Sarah Whitmore, who seemed to know everyone in a 5-mile radius, and had a gift for convincing them to show up. Sarah organized everything with a clipboard and a whistle she wasn't afraid to use. "Drywall crew, you're with me," she'd call out. "Electrical, over there. And somebody please tell me who ordered 40 pounds of nails when we needed screws." Jake Thompson, the young club member who'd once argued the reward money should stay with the club, spent his Saturdays up on ladders, restringing wires through the ceiling. He worked next to a retired electrician named Gus, who'd volunteered after reading about the center in the local paper. Jake asked more questions in those months than he had in his whole life, and Gus answered every one of them like it mattered. Ethan came every single day after school, sleeves rolled up, grease under his fingernails before noon. He didn't boss anyone around or act like he was in charge, even though everyone understood the center was his dream taking shape. He just worked. He fixed the doors that wouldn't close right. He helped lay tile in what would become the main workshop floor. He spent an entire weekend with 3 neighborhood kids, teaching them how to sand and stain the long wooden workbenches that would fill the room. Those 3 kids kept coming back. Their names were Miguel, Destiny, and a quiet boy named Alex, who barely said a word the first 2 weeks but showed up anyway, every single day, just to watch and help where he could. Ethan never pushed him to talk. He just handed him tools and let him find his own way in. Robert Cole visited twice during the renovation, standing quietly near the entrance, watching the walls go up around a place meant to hold his uncle's memory. The second time, he brought a box of old photographs he'd found in his father's attic. Pictures of Daniel as a young man, grinning next to motorcycles Jack had never seen before. Jack framed 3 of them and hung them near the front door. By late summer, the building had transformed. Fresh paint covered the walls, a soft gray that Sarah picked because she said it wouldn't show grease stains as bad. The workbenches gleamed under new lighting. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Daniel Cole Community Repair Center," the letters carved by one of the older club members who used to do woodwork before his hands got too shaky for much else. The morning of opening day arrived clear and warm. A small crowd gathered outside, parents and neighbors and club members all mixed together, nobody quite fitting the mold of who belonged where anymore. Jack stood near the back, watching Ethan walk toward the front doors carrying something small and worn in both hands. It was Daniel's old toolbox, the metal dented and the paint chipped from decades of use. Ethan carried it like it weighed more than it did, like it held something far heavier than tools. Miguel, Destiny, and Alex stood near the entrance, waiting. Ethan walked past them, into the center, and set the toolbox on the main workbench, right in the middle of the room where everyone would see it first thing when they walked through the door. Then he turned around and looked at the 3 teenagers standing in the doorway. "Come on in," he said. "There's a lot to learn." 6 weeks after opening day, the Daniel Cole Community Repair Center smelled like oil and sawdust and coffee from the pot Sarah kept running in the corner. Jack stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching the room the way he used to watch a road before a long ride, taking in everything at once. Miguel had an engine block torn apart on the workbench closest to the window, pieces laid out in neat rows like he was performing surgery. 3 months ago, the kid could barely sit still through a school lunch period, according to his mother. Now he moved slow and careful, checking each part twice before setting it down. "You're overthinking the gasket," Ethan said, leaning over his shoulder. "Feel it first, don't just look at it." Miguel picked up the gasket, ran his thumb along the edge, and frowned. "It's warped, right here." "There you go." Ethan clapped him once on the back and moved on. Destiny was 2 benches over, working with a girl named Priya who'd shown up 2 weeks ago after hearing about the center from a friend at school. Destiny had picked up wiring faster than anyone, faster even than Jake had back when he started. She was teaching Priya now how to strip a wire without nicking the copper underneath, her voice patient in a way that surprised Jack every time he heard it. Destiny hadn't been a patient kid. Not at first. And then there was Alex. Alex still didn't talk much, but he'd built a reputation in the shop as the one who could find a problem nobody else could see. He was hunched over a lawnmower engine that had been dropped off by an elderly woman down the street, turning a wrench with the kind of focus that made the rest of the world disappear. When he finally got the thing to sputter to life, he didn't cheer or shout. He just looked up, caught Ethan's eye across the room, and nodded once. Ethan nodded back like that was the whole conversation. And it was. Jack watched all of it. The kids weren't just learning how to fix things. They were learning how to trust themselves. He'd seen grown men in his own club take years to learn that lesson, if they ever learned it at all. He waited until the shop cleared out that evening, until it was just him and Ethan closing up, wiping down the workbenches, turning off the lights 1 row at a time. "You know," Jack said, breaking the quiet, "your grandfather would have loved this place." Ethan set down the rag he was holding. "Yeah, I think he would have." Jack leaned against the doorframe, watching the boy, really watching him, the way he'd watched him that first day in the garage when everyone else had laughed, and Jack hadn't. He thought about Thomas Reed, about the vision the man used to talk about late at night, sitting by the fire outside the old clubhouse, a place where nobody got left behind, where everybody had something to give, no matter how small it seemed. Thomas used to say something, Jack said. Said the club wasn't going to be built by the loudest guy in the room. Said it'd be built by somebody quiet, somebody who showed up and did the work without needing anybody to clap for him. He paused. I used to wonder who he meant. Ethan looked down at the toolbox sitting on the main bench, the one that had been sitting there since opening day, dented metal catching the last bit of evening light through the window. I know who he meant now, Jack said. It's you, kid. You became exactly the kind of person he was hoping for. All those years, waiting on somebody like you to show up. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve, not quite meeting Jack's eyes. I didn't want any of this to be about me, Ethan said finally. I just wanted people to remember my grandfather. That's all I ever wanted. He never got any credit for what he did, and it felt wrong. Him just disappearing from the story like he was never even there. He's not disappearing anymore, Jack said. Neither are you. Ethan looked up at that, and something in his face shifted, something young and tired and grateful all at once. I just wanted him remembered, he said again, quieter this time. That's all it was ever about. The morning of the charity ride came bright and clear, the kind of blue sky that made everything look sharper than usual. Jack stood in the parking lot of the clubhouse, watching the crowd grow bigger by the minute. He had organized rides before. Poker runs, memorial rides, fundraisers for members who had fallen sick. But he had never seen anything like this. Cars lined the street for 3 blocks. Families spread out blankets on the grass like they were waiting for a parade. Kids ran between the motorcycles, eyes wide, pointing at the chrome and the leather and the patches on the riders' vests. A few years ago, those same kids might have been told to stay away from men like this. Today, their parents were snapping photos of them sitting on the bikes. Marcus walked up beside Jack, arms crossed, watching the same scene. Never thought I'd see this many people show up smiling at us, he said. Used to be they'd cross the street. Times change, Jack said. People change, Marcus said. That's the real thing. At the center of it all sat the motorcycle. Thomas Reed's motorcycle, restored and gleaming, parked on a small platform so everyone could see it. The morning sun hit the metal just right, making it look almost alive, like it was waiting for something. A group of veterans stood near it, some in wheelchairs, some leaning on canes, all of them looking at the bike like it meant something personal to them. Jack had learned over the past few months that it did. The charity ride raised money for veterans' families, for kids in need of school supplies, for single parents working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. The bike had become the face of all of it. Ethan stood near the platform, dressed simply, no different than any other day at the shop. Sarah stood next to him, going over the route one more time with a volunteer holding a clipboard. Jake was helping direct riders into their lines, calling out instructions with a confidence that would have surprised the version of him from a year ago. Robert Cole showed up too, standing a little apart from the crowd, watching his cousin's grandson with an expression Jack couldn't quite read. Robert had come a long way from the man who once threatened lawsuits over ownership of journals and stories. Now he just watched, quiet, maybe even proud. When it was time to start the ride, Jack climbed onto Thomas Reed's motorcycle himself. He had thought about who should ride it, debated it for weeks in his head. In the end, it felt right for him to be the one, carrying the machine forward the way Thomas once had, the way Daniel once helped make possible, the way Ethan had brought back to life. The engine roared underneath him, steady and strong, the same sound that had shocked everyone in that garage months ago. Jack looked out at the crowd, hundreds of people, riders on their bikes, engines idling, waiting for his signal, veterans holding small flags, kids waving from the sidewalk, families who had once been suspicious of the Hells Angels now cheering like they were watching old friends. Jack raised his hand, and the whole line of motorcycles began to move, one by one, the sound rolling down the street like thunder. People clapped as they passed. Some cried. An old man in a wheelchair saluted as the bike went by, and Jack felt something rise up in his chest that he hadn't expected. Something that felt a lot like the pride Thomas must have felt building this machine in the first place. They rode through town, past the shop, past the diner where members used to get dirty looks from other customers, past the school where some of the center's kids studied every day. The whole route was lined with people waving, cheering, watching the motorcycle glide past like a piece of history finally being seen the right way. By the time the ride circled back to the clubhouse, Jack cut the engine and looked out at the crowd gathered around him. More people than he had ever imagined standing shoulder to shoulder around one motorcycle. It was no longer just a machine. It was no longer just a symbol of one club, one founder, one broken engine fixed by a boy nobody believed in. It had become something bigger, something that belonged to everyone. Later that afternoon, after the crowds had gone home and the street had gone quiet again, Ethan walked back to the garage alone. His boots crunched over gravel that still held the smell of exhaust and sunshine. The clubhouse was empty now, most of the bikes parked and cooling, but the garage door stood open like it always did, like it was waiting for someone to walk through it. He stepped inside and stopped. There it was. The same spot on the concrete floor where he had knelt down almost a year ago, toolbox in hand, while a room full of grown men laughed at him. He could still remember the sound of it, the way one mechanic had smirked and said, "Kid probably can't even change a tire." The way another had shaken his head and muttered something about wasting everybody's time. He remembered how his hands had trembled a little as he opened his grandfather's old toolbox, the metal latch cold under his fingers. He remembered how quiet the room had gone once he found the loose wire, the tiny corroded connection nobody else had thought to check. 60 seconds. That was all it took. 60 seconds to change everything. Ethan ran his hand along the workbench, remembering it all, when he heard footsteps behind him. "Figured I'd find you here," Jack said, walking in with 2 bottles of water. He handed one to Ethan and leaned against the bench, arms crossed, looking around the garage like he was remembering the same day. "Just thinking," Ethan said, "about the doubters?" Ethan nodded. "Feels like a long time ago, but I still remember exactly what they said." Jack took a slow breath, nodding too. "People doubt what they don't understand," he said. "That day, everybody in this room saw a kid with a toolbox, standing next to grown men who'd spent their whole lives working on engines. They didn't see what I saw." "What did you see?" Jack looked at him steady, the way he always did when he meant something serious. "I saw someone who wasn't trying to prove he was smarter than everybody else. I saw someone who just wanted to fix something broken because he cared about it. That's rare, Ethan. Skill can be taught. Caring like that can't." Ethan looked down at the floor, at the exact spot where the motorcycle had once sat silent and broken for 12 long years. "I almost didn't come in that day," he admitted. "I stood outside for probably 10 minutes before I walked through that door." "Why?" "Because I figured you'd laugh at me too." Jack shook his head slowly. "Real change," he said, "doesn't start when somebody proves themselves. It starts before that. It starts when somebody believes in you before you've done anything to earn it. That's what your grandfather did for Thomas. That's what I try to do now." Ethan looked up at him, something settling quietly in his chest, like a weight finally letting go. Before he could answer, the garage door creaked, and a boy about 15 years old stepped inside, dragging a beat-up dirt bike by the handlebars. He had messy hair, dirt on his jeans, and the same nervous look Ethan remembered having himself not so long ago. "Somebody said this is where people fix stuff," the boy said, voice a little shaky. "My bike hasn't run in months. Everybody says it's junk." Ethan glanced at Jack, who only smiled and stepped back, giving him room. "Bring it over here," Ethan said, waving the boy toward the bench. The boy pushed the dirt bike closer, glancing nervously between Ethan and Jack, like he expected to be laughed at any second. Ethan knelt down beside the bike, the same way he had knelt beside the motorcycle that first day. He listened as the boy explained what was wrong, how it sputtered and died no matter what he tried. Instead of taking over, Ethan handed him a wrench. "Let's take a look together," Ethan said. "Show me what you've already tried." The boy's eyes lit up with surprise, like nobody had ever said those words to him before. Jack stood back near the door, watching quietly, arms crossed, feeling something warm rise in his chest as Ethan guided the boy's hands toward the engine, patient and calm, the same way Daniel Cole once must have guided a young Thomas Reed decades before. Jack waited until the boy and his dirt bike had gone home, the small engine finally purring like it had never known a single bad day. He watched Ethan wave goodbye at the door, wiping grease off his hands with an old rag, that same quiet smile on his face that never asked for anything in return. "You heading out?" Ethan asked. "Thought I'd take her for a ride," Jack said, nodding towards the motorcycle resting near the back wall. The evening light coming through the garage door made the paint on the tank glow like it was lit from somewhere deep inside. Ethan didn't ask to come along. He just nodded, like he understood this was something Jack needed to do alone. Jack rolled the motorcycle outside, swung his leg over the seat, and felt the familiar weight of it settle beneath him. He turned the key. The engine caught on the first try. Steady and strong, the same sound that had filled the garage with silence and wonder almost a year ago. He pulled out onto the street and let the town swallow him up. The road wound past the old diner where Thomas Reed used to sit by the window some mornings, drinking black coffee and watching the world move slow. It passed the empty lot where the very first clubhouse had stood before a fire took it, back when the club was nothing but a handful of men nobody else wanted. Jack rode past the church where Thomas used to volunteer on Sundays, past the small park where he'd once organized a cookout for families who had nowhere else to go on Thanksgiving. Jack remembered hearing the stories as a young man, back when he was new to the club, and Thomas was still alive. Thomas used to say the town didn't need another motorcycle club. It needed a family, a place where broken men, forgotten men, men the world had given up on, could find something worth showing up for. Jack rode slow past the old repair shop, where Thomas first met Daniel Cole, two strangers bonded by grease-stained hands and a shared belief that something worth building was worth building right. He thought about how easily that belief could have stayed buried. If Ethan hadn't walked through that garage door, if Jack hadn't looked past the boy's age and saw what was underneath. The wind pushed against him as he rode, carrying the smell of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke, and Jack felt something heavy settle in his chest. They had almost lost it. Not the motorcycle. The purpose. Somewhere along the way, protecting Thomas Reed's legacy had turned into protecting an image, a story told the way it was easiest to tell, instead of the way it actually happened. They had let pride sit where humility used to be. He thought about Marcus, stubborn and scared of change, clinging to a version of history that felt safer than the truth. He thought about the members who wanted the reward money kept close, who called kindness weakness without understanding it was the very thing that built this club in the first place. He thought about how close they'd come to becoming exactly what Thomas Reed never wanted them to be. But then he thought about Ethan, about the boy who walked in that afternoon dragging a broken dirt bike, eyes nervous and unsure, the way Ethan himself once looked. About how naturally Ethan had knelt down beside him, handed him a wrench, and said, "Let's look at this together." No lecture, no showing off, just patience and belief, passed from one set of hands to another. That was it, Jack realized, riding slow through the quiet streets as the sun dropped low behind the rooftops. That was the whole point, not the bike, not the money, not even the club itself. It was this exact thing. One person choosing to believe in another person before they'd done anything to earn it. By the time Jack turned back toward the garage, the sky had turned a soft orange, the kind that made the whole town look gentle for a little while. He pulled into the lot and cut the engine, letting the quiet settle around him. Inside the garage, Ethan had already gone, leaving the lights dimmed low. Jack walked slowly toward the workbench, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out Daniel Cole's old wrench, the one Ethan had given him weeks earlier, worn smooth from decades of careful hands. He set it gently on the small stand beside the motorcycle, right next to the engraved plate bearing both Thomas Reed's name and Daniel Cole's. Jack stood there a long moment, looking at the wrench resting quietly beside the machine it had once helped build. 1 year later, the parking lot outside the Daniel Cole Community Repair Center was full before noon. Trucks and motorcycles lined the street, and folding tables covered with paper cloths sat under a row of trees that had just started to grow their summer leaves. Someone had strung up banners across the front of the building, hand-painted, the letters a little crooked in places. A group of kids ran past carrying paper plates loaded with hot dogs, laughing about something only they understood. Jack stood near the front door, watching it all with his arms crossed and a small, tired smile on his face. A year ago, this building had been an empty shell with broken windows and a rusted sign nobody bothered to read anymore. Now it buzzed with life. Engines revved in the garage bays. Voices called out over the sound of tools clinking against metal. Somewhere a radio played old rock and roll, the kind Thomas Reed used to hum while he worked. Marcus stood near the grill, flipping burgers with a paper apron tied around his waist, looking nothing like the stubborn man who once argued against digging up the past. He caught Jack's eye and gave a small nod. It was enough. Some things didn't need words anymore. Sarah Whitmore moved through the crowd with a clipboard, checking off names, greeting families who had come from towns Jack had never even heard of. Word had spread. Veterans came looking for purpose. Teenagers came looking for something to belong to. Parents came just to see what all the talk was about. Inside the garage, rows of workbenches lined the walls, each one busy with hands learning something new. Old engines sat half taken apart, waiting for young mechanics to figure them out piece by piece. On the far wall, a corkboard held photographs from the last year. Kids holding up wrenches like trophies. A teenage girl fixing her first bicycle chain. A boy proudly showing off a lawnmower engine he rebuilt from scratch. Ethan stood near the back, watching a 13-year-old boy named Miguel lean over a small engine that had been sitting broken for weeks. Miguel's hands were shaking a little, nervous the way Ethan's own had been that first day he walked into Jack's garage. His grandfather's old toolbox sat open on the bench beside them, the metal dented and scratched from decades of use, but every tool inside still sharp, still ready. "Just listen to it," Ethan said quietly, the way his grandfather's journal had once taught him. "Don't rush. It'll tell you what's wrong if you're patient." Miguel nodded, wiping his palms on his jeans before reaching for the wrench. He turned a bolt, adjusted a wire, and paused. Across the garage, Jack made his way over, drawn by the quiet focus in the corner. He stood beside Ethan, watching the boy work, remembering another afternoon exactly like this one. A year had passed, but some things stayed exactly the same, in the best way possible. "He reminds me of someone," Jack said. Ethan smiled, not looking away from Miguel. "Yeah, me too." Miguel took a breath, turned the key, and the little engine sputtered once, coughed, and then caught, running smooth and steady, filling the garage with a small, triumphant roar. Miguel's face lit up so bright it looked like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I did it!" he shouted, jumping back from the bench. "I actually did it." A few people nearby clapped. Someone whistled. Miguel turned toward Ethan with wide eyes, like he needed someone to confirm it was real. "You did," Ethan said, nodding. "All you." Jack looked past them both, toward the center of the garage where the restored motorcycle sat gleaming under the shop lights, the paint on the tank catching the sun pouring through the open bay doors. Thomas Reed's name and Daniel Cole's name shone together on the engraved plate beside it, the old wrench resting quietly nearby, exactly where Jack had placed it. The bike wasn't just a machine anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was proof that broken things could be made whole again, that forgotten people could be remembered, and that sometimes it took nothing more than one person choosing to believe in another to change everything. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.